All right, good morning, everybody. Welcome to another ePrime live stream. My name is Devon. I am, of course, training coordinator for psychology software tools. And today we're going to be talking about ePrime 3 again. So today's webinar, or today's live stream, is a little bit of a follow-up to last week's. So what it's going to be today is, last week we talked a lot about the button object and the choice objects and the slider objects. Today we're going to be talking about all of the other new features that are included in ePrime 3. So there's actually quite a lot packed in here today, but it's not going to be kind of as property intensive as the last one was. So last time we kind of went through all the very finite, very minute properties just to let you know what they all did and how they interact with your experiment. Today we're going to be going over all of kind of the broad topic kind of things. So it'll be a little faster pace than last week's was. So let's go ahead and jump right in. The first property, and probably one of the coolest ones that I want to demonstrate, is called Property Find and Replace. So if you're used to working with ePrime, you knew that we had find and replace in, let's say, the user script or in an inline objects. You could do that. But now, if you hit Control F at any point in the experiment, so right now I just kind of clicked in the white space in that Experiment Explorer and hit Control F on my keyboard, and actually showed up on my other monitor there, you get a Property Find and Replace window. Now, this is a really useful tool if you want to change a very specific property very quickly in your experiment. So a good example here is you can find any particular property, or you could replace it. I'm going to go ahead and demonstrate the replace. So what I do here is, under Replace, I go ahead and click on Type. And here I can select any type of object that I want. So I'm going to demonstrate how to change the text in my experiment, and not just one of the text objects, but all of the text in my experiment. So instead of selecting all, I'm going to need to select the options that have text associated with them. So a slide text sub-object will, as will a text display. So those are going to be my two types of things that I'm most focused on. Keep in mind that you can change this with really any property. So if you find that you don't like a white background in your experiment, you want, let's say, a light gray background or something similar to that, you can also do that. But for now, I'm just demonstrating that text. And then property, in this case, I'm going to look for font name. And then contains. And then these are all of my options here. I'm going to say Consolus. So anytime that I see a font name in my experiment of Consolus, I'm going to replace it, let's say, with Times New Roman. And then replacement type is either complete or partial. It's going to be complete. So every single time I see Consolus, I want to replace that with Times New Roman. And I'm going to go ahead and click Replace All. It says Replace All operation cannot be undone. Do you want to save the experiment first? I'm going to go ahead and click No. I don't necessarily need to save this. If you notice here, this is our script task event sample, which is another new feature that I'm going to talk about. But this is our script task event sample that comes with ePrime, is just installed with ePrime. So I don't really care that I'm overwriting the font there, so I'm going to click No. Now it's going to say Find or Replace Property 2 failed with the following error message. The search for field must not be blank. Would you like to suppress similar error messages? I'm going to go ahead and click Yes. So it made no replacements there. So let's go ahead and change that one more time. So what am I searching for here? I'm searching for Consolus, and I'm replacing with Times New Roman. And I'm going to go ahead and say Find All. So if you look here, if I click Find All, these are all of the objects in my experiment that contain the font Consolus right here. So then if I go ahead and double click on it, you'll see that there, in fact, is Consolus. There we go. And then if I look at that font right there, there's my Consolus. So it looks like I am, in fact, or these are all of the objects in my experiment that have that font. So then if I were to go ahead and replace, I'll replace Consolus with Times New Roman. And I'll find one instance of this. Just click Replace. Click No. I'll click Yes there. All right, so let's see if I can just replace one. So if I want to change Consolus here and replace with Times New Roman, there we go. Click Replace. There we go. So now that value is Times New Roman instead of Consolus. So you can see here, I can either replace all, which is all of them all at once, or I can just do them one at a time. And it actively shows you, if you look here in my my little structure window, you can see that it shows you where it's highlighting each one of these things and what's being changed. So now that I've made all of those changes, let's hop back in here And I can see that my font is Times New Roman instead of Consolis. So it's just a really quick and really easy way to kind of change all of the properties in your experiment without having to sit down and actually run through each and every one of these things. So I don't have to open up my goodbye object, select this, go to the font here and change the font name. It just is another way to kind of help you make your experiments a lot faster. And we do have a lot of other features that help you make experiments a lot faster as well. Another one that we have here, and I'm going to add a new slide to this just randomly, just to demonstrate this feature here. But if you go into, and I talked about this a little bit last week, if you go into any slide object that you make, if you click on the Slide Layout Templates button at the top, this is another new feature that we've added that kind of helps you design your experiment much faster. And we have a lot of different options for slide layout templates. So the first one that we have is a 5-item single selection. So these work with either the slide sliders, the slide buttons, or the slide choice objects. So the first one we have here are some multiple choice options. These have to do with the slide choice object. So this will add a 5-item slide choice that responds primarily to text. Then we have a 10-item multiple selection, 10-item multiple selection, but each object in the selection is an attribute reference, so it helps you fill that in very quickly. We then have more Likert type scales, so we have a rating scale. We have a 5-point all labels, a 5-point all labels with an image prompt. We have five labels, or 5-point all labels, image prompt with attribute references, and then you can change the varying of the labels here, so we don't have any labels on this one, or just the 2 endpoints. In this one instance, the 2 endpoints are pictures, and this one's a 7.1 with midpoints and endpoints, but not everyone is labeled. And of course, once you add these, you can always change and edit them the way you want. The point is that these are really good starting points for your slide objects and how they want to be set up. Because basically, whenever I make slide objects, a lot of the time that I spend in a slide object isn't necessarily formatting the slide object and all of its components correctly. It's more to do with how everything is spaced and does it look visually appealing whenever I'm running the task, whenever I have somebody running the task. And this is how you would make a 5-point matrix. And then we have some of our slider ones. So we have our horizontal sliders here. So, with varying degrees of endpoints. We have our vertical slider here. It's at 100 points. It's more like a thermometer type thing. And then we have different ways to interact with button objects that people might need. So if you're using a touchscreen, for example, we have an option to make an on-screen keyboard or a number pad. If you're doing that on your touchscreen as well, we have a circle layout, or yes, no buttons, a 4-item grid, a 9-item grid, a 10-item recognition prompt. These recognitions are more kind of like those card matching games. So you click on this button and there's a picture underneath. Those types of things. They're more set up for those kinds of games. And keep in mind that in our resources folder, we have all of those cards preset. So I'll show you those resources folder a little later, but that makes these a lot easier. So I'm going to go ahead and add, let's say, this 5-point all labels image prompt just to show you quick some of the new features here. So if you can see here, we actually have an image technically loaded into this. It said add your image in properties, and if you look in this folder here, we have this at resources slide layout template image. So if you go to that folder, and I'll just go there very quickly. I believe this is on the C drive. There we go. Just C program files, find PST and ePrime3, and then you go into resources. We actually have a resource called SLT. And if you double click on it, what it's going to do is it's actually going to show you the defaults that it's going to load in. So if you find that you're always loading the same image in, you can actually take out this SLT image and load it in with your preset SLT image. But in this case, this one just says add your image in your properties, and if you look here, that's the image that shows up whenever you load the SLT. So if you have one that you want to add to the experiment, then that's exactly how you would add it. You just go into that folder. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this because I'm going to show you some of the runtime components we have now. So those are kind of more the design time things to help designing the experiment and making it a little better. We have a couple of other features that will allow you to test the experiment. So these are kind of the debugging features, if you will. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go ahead and click on this windowed mode button, and I'm going to click on this drop down. So this windowed mode button, if you're familiar with using ePrime 2, has actually definitely upgraded since ePrime 2. So first there's that clock scale. You can go from 1x speed to 4x speed. That's been there since ePrime 2. That's not a problem. Enable auto response for this session of the eRun test, also been there forever. Run the experiment in windowed mode is one of the newer features that we've added. So not only will you run this at up to 4 times normal speed, but you can verify, or you can guarantee that E prime isn't using the entire screen or taking over the entire screen whenever you click run on this experiment. So now it's going to run in its own self-contained window, and you can actually tell it what percentage of the screen you want it to take up. So do you want 25% of the screen, 50%, 100, 150%? And then you can allow the display windows to be resized or not whenever you run the experiment. So if I go ahead and click run now, you're going to see that this experiment is actually going to show up in this new, it's called an eRun experiment window. And this is actually going to have a lot of really important information. It gives you another level of control over the run of your experiment. So I'm just going to go ahead and enter subject 1 session 1 here. And this is my first display object here. So while this is running, if I go ahead and look in here, you're going to see that I have quite a few options here now. I have an option to pause my experiment. So I'm going to go ahead and pause it quick so it just stays on that screen there. And if I want to, I can actually step my experiment forward 1 object. So if I click on step, it's actually going to go to the next object. And then if I look here, these are all of the properties that are going to be logged in my experiment file. So the experiment version, for example, my group, what my random seed is, what my subject is, what my session is, all of those are going to show up in my data file. And this little context here is an active updating of what my data file is going to look like. So if at any point I'm like, gee, I wonder what the data file will look like once I'm done with this, I can actually pause my experiment here and take a look at all of these properties. And if I look here into the script, it tells me exactly what part I'm on. So right now it says I'm on instructions.run in my full script. So that's where my experiment is, and the next thing is to go to my block list once this is done. And then if I want to, here I have break conditions. So these break conditions allow me to actively enter live script and see how they'll evaluate in this context of the experiment. So if I want to see how an attribute is going to resolve, I want to see how a variable that I said is going to resolve, I can add my script into this window here, and then it'll plug that into the context of my experiment and then tell me what's going to happen with that script while I'm actively running. So it's a really good way to kind of debug your experiment. If you're like, this thing doesn't seem to be working, you can enter it here and see how it's resolving actively. So I'm going to go ahead and exit this quickly. And if you click exit, what it will do is it'll actually go ahead and try to make that data file for you if you've run enough trials. So if you can see there, I clicked exit, so therefore I get a data file already from that run. Had I clicked abort, it would be like pressing Control-Shift on the keyboard in the middle of my run, and it wouldn't have produced that data file. So that's why I did exit instead. So that's one of the great new features that we've added too. The other one that we've added, and I'm going to actually do a simpler experiment than this one just to demonstrate that feature. I'll go into samples here. I'll just do basic RT for everybody. There we go. So I'll just load basic RT very quickly, and I'll show you one of the other things we have that just gives you another level of control over the experiment whenever you're testing it. And that's if you go ahead and drop down all of your objects, you can see these little checkboxes. These checkboxes allow you to determine what objects run in your experiment and which do not. So, for example, if I have a very long experiment and I say, okay, I know I've tested the first half, I know it works fine, I don't need to see this first half again, you just simply uncheck the objects that you don't want to see in this run and they won't be run. So for example, if I don't want my instructions and goodbye screen to show up and I only want to get into the nitty-gritty and see how my trials work, I can choose to not run them during this session here, so I can just uncheck them. But I'll keep them in. But you can do something very similar to list objects. Now, if I click on this list object here, you'll notice the first thing that happens is the checkbox doesn't go away. It actually turns into this little blue eye. What that means is this list has now become interactive. I'm going to go ahead and run this experiment to show you what that's like. Alright, so there's my welcome screen. So now this is my interactive list. So what I can do here is I can actually say, okay, do I want to run the next trial? Do I want to add a trial? Do I want to remove all trials? Do I want to shuffle the trials? Am I going to start adding things to down here? So this is my current trial, and I can look at all of the variables that are going to be loaded. So if I look here, I'm running trial proc, my stimulus is going to be X, correct answer is 1, and my trial list is run. I'll click 1 next, and that's exactly what appears, is whatever showed up down there. So now you can see here that my weight of that 1X trial has de-incremented. So I now have only one of these left, and I have 2 of these Y procedures left. And if I want, I can go ahead and add a Y procedure now to see what the Y looks like. And I'll go ahead and run next. It's going to be that X because it randomly selected that X from the next one there. Let's go ahead and add both of these here. I'll click run next, and those will be my Y trials. And of course, that was the correct answer was 2. I clicked a 1 just to make sure it's interacting correctly. So it tells you exactly what's going to be run next and what you have left. So if you ever want to check out very specific trials of your experiment, so okay, well I have 2 conditions nested in this list or 2 conditions in this list object, and I want to see what both conditions are like to make sure that they run, this is exactly how you do that. So you can just click add, and you can add 1, you can add the remaining weight to them. You can look at your history here, and you can see all of the trials that have run before it, and you can see what the current trial is. You can also adjust the cycles if you want. So I can do 1 sample for different cycles. I can do make it samples or cycles or seconds, and then I can either have it return back to this list object, or I can set it to terminate after this run. So if I have a lot of objects in my list object, and I only wanted to run a couple of them, I can just click terminate, and it'll just terminate right after this. So I click that. Again, got a wrong answer. It terminated for 2 reasons. One, because I set it to, and the other because there obviously was no more samples left in the list object. And then go ahead and click exit, and it made my data file. So I can then go ahead and take a look at my data file if I really wanted to. But the interactive list is really, really helpful if you need to know how each and every one of your trials is going to interact with each other and interact with all of the objects, especially if you have a lot of things that you're varying between trials in the experiment. So I'm just going to turn that back on and go ahead and click close there. So that's actually a really, really nice feature that we've added to ePrime as well, especially just in relation to how you debug your experiment and how you can tell your experiment's going to work exactly the way you want it to. We've also updated the functionality of a few things. The first one that I want to show here, or actually 2 of them that I want to show, happen to be in the Devices tab here. So in this Devices tab, first off, if you're not familiar with ePrime 3, you can see 2 new devices that are by default added to your experiment. One of which is the script device, and the other of which is the button device. And I'm going to show off the script device a little later. And the button device we kind of talked about almost ad nauseum in the last video. So if you want to learn more about that button device and why it's there, definitely check out the last live stream that I did, because we really go into all of its properties and what it does. But if I go ahead and click add here, the one thing that you're going to notice is that Chronos is actually added to the experiment by default, or added to your eStudio by default. If you're familiar with ePrime 2, you know that you had to actually have an installation disk in order to get the Chronos device into your experiment. This is actually included with every ePrime 3 installation, is this Chronos device. So if you have Chronos and you have ePrime 3, there's no need to install anything, just install ePrime and it should be right there. And the other thing we've added here is for the socket device, we've actually added functionality here where UDP communication, so just like this, UDP communication can now receive data. So before it couldn't actually receive data. This is really, really good news. It's a really big feature, and we're actually going to be rolling out a sample of this and exactly how this is accomplished very, very shortly. So if you'd like that sample, go ahead and leave me a comment. I'd be happy to send it to you in private. Otherwise, we should be rolling that out on our sample site very, very soon, just as soon as we get that approved. So that's actually a pretty big new feature, is that we can now receive data through UDP as well. I'm going to go ahead and remove that one. And while I'm here, there is one other cool feature here. If you hop on over to this data file tab here, you can see that we have one more property here. It says create a tab delimited copy of the data file. Now this is a really cool feature because, and this is actually a pretty requested new feature. This new feature actually allows us to, instead of having to open up your EDAT file or your data file in eDataAid and then copy it over to Excel or SPSS or whatever you have, you can actually click this, and whenever ePrime runs an experiment, right now it has just the ES3 and that experiment advisor report. It'll also make a tab delimited.txt version of your data file, so you don't have to use eDataAid as that intermediary device or intermediary program between your two between you and your data analysis package. All you have to do is just import that tab delimited.txt file, and you have all of your data right there already. So I know that was a pretty requested feature, so there's definitely a lot to check out there. Another major update that we made, and this is specifically for if you're running videos or if you're running if you're running videos or if you're running audio in your experiment, we actually now render everything natively to FFmpeg. So if you're familiar with ePrime2 and how we loaded audio and video into the experiment, we actually had there was some difficulty running audio and video because we had actually attempted to run the video at its native, using its native codecs, using all of its native mappings. And while that resulted in really high and really fast millisecond presentation of these objects, it would sometimes lead to infrequent presentation of these objects, or a little bug or a couple of bugs that needed rectified either through codec config or downloading another codec pack or changing APIs, those types of things. Now we actually render everything in FFmpeg, and what this does is it does a better job of creating a constant mapping across all of your machines. So instead of having one machine mapped this way, another machine mapped this way, just to get the same video to play on both machines, they're completely consistent because it's all going to be in FFmpeg, and it's going to have there'll be less variable loading. So for example, like if direct show loads one way and you have something else that'll load another way on a machine, you would introduce like a level of variability in your experiments that you obviously wouldn't want between devices. So now that we render everything in FFmpeg, all of your audio and all of your video are going to be rendered exactly the same no matter what device you're actually on. And what this also eliminates too is it also eliminates the need to download third-party applications, because some of the problems that people would run into, and especially here at the office too, if you were to run a third-party application like I don't know, like DivX or something like that in order to get some codecs onto your machine. A lot of the time these programs are free to download, but how they make their money is they have other applications included in their downloads. So you would get all of this bloatware on your machine from these third-party applications just to get ePrime to run, and you would have all these programs you don't need and all of these unnecessary applications that would download as a part of these codec packs. So rendering everything in FFmpeg just helps to eliminate that, because then you don't need to go out and seek those other third-party codec packs. Everything's just in FFmpeg, and everything works a lot more consistently now with a lot less variability between machines. So while it's not immediately obvious that we do that, just know that that happens kind of under the covers or behind the scenes in ePrime. So it's something that's going to be really helpful whenever you're loading audio and video into your experiment a little later. So that's definitely something that I would keep in mind. If you are loading audio and video into your experiment, you don't have to go through as many steps as you had to when you were using ePrime2. So for this next one, I'm actually going to reopen that script task events experiment, because this part of the webinar is specifically about script task events, which is a new feature that we've added. So if you saw when I opened up my devices, you saw that I had a script device in there. And I know that when I first saw it, I was like, script device? You can't plug a script into your computer. Because I was a little bit naive. But what this allows you to do, this script device, is it actually allows you to take subroutines that you've written in your user script. So the reason I pulled this one up is because we actually have quite a few subroutines loaded into this one, so I can show you. I don't have to come up with these on my own. And in case you didn't know, this is a feature in ePrime2, it's a little known feature. This little bar up here, this is a subroutine drop-down bar. So if you click on it, it's going to give you an overview of all of the subroutines that you can see. And if you, or all the subroutines that you define in script. So if you just press the up or down arrow, it'll hop to the actual declaration of that subroutine in your script. So I have two. I have clear all and I have eliminate option. So if I click on one of them and click either up or down, it'll hop me to that part of my script, which is really nice if you're working with multiple subroutines. But what the script task event does is you can make subroutines and define them in your user script here. So I have one called clear all, and what it does is it actually clears buttons from the screen. And I have one called eliminate option, and what eliminate option does is it goes through buttons that have been defined on the screen, and it essentially eliminates the option by changing that background state, and it makes it so you can't actually click on that button in the future. So once you've made your subroutines here, you can go into any object that you want, click on the properties page and click on task event, and if you look here, you can actually reference those subroutines through a task event. Now, the benefit of this is it actually eliminates the need for a lot of clunky if-then script, a lot of do-while loops, a lot of those types of things. What this allows you to do is it allows you to time lock the execution of your script with the event that you choose in ePrime. So for example, stimulus start time is Stimulus start time is defined as whenever the object is beginning to perform its current task. I go over the difference between start time and onset time on my ePrime tips and tricks video, so definitely check that one out. But basically, it's your last chance to change any properties of the object before it gets drawn on the screen. So at the start time, we call, and I have a delay of 0, we call this script, this subroutine called clear all. And what this is going to do is it's going to make sure that all the changes that have been made to the stimulus object are completely undone, and the stimulus object looks normal. So we're going to be calling that one at start time. Then you'll notice we have a couple of onset time. Task events here. And if you'll notice, each of them vary by their delay. So, for example, if the stimulus object has been on the screen for 3,000 milliseconds, then ePrime is going to do the action in the eliminate option subroutine that we made, and it's going to set that custom value to 1. So we hop back in here. We have eliminate option, and then that custom value here is x as integer. And then it would be filling in the value of x as 1, which is basically like telling ePrime eliminate one of the options. And then, here we go. If we go back into here, after 6,000 milliseconds, we'd fill in that x in that subroutine with 2. We would, and then after 9,000 milliseconds, 3, and then after 12,000 milliseconds, or 1,200, 100, yeah. Yeah, after 12,000, my bad. After 12,000 milliseconds, fill in that x value with 4. So that's just saying that we're going to be gradually eliminating these. And if you run through the sample, which I totally recommend, what this is going to do is it's going to show you how to create basically a quiz show in ePrime. And I actually do a really good job of showing you how I build this experiment, or how this experiment was built. If you go ahead and take a look at that video, you can also find it on YouTube. I show you exactly how how this experiment was built. So definitely check out that video if you're curious about this experiment's functionality. But that's how you would use those. That's how you would use those script task events. You would use them to just kind of load into the actual events of an object, and it would perform the functions of that subroutine without you having to call that subroutine and worry about, oh, is the duration right on my stimulus object to call it at the right time, and how do I implement all of these delays and these types of things. It completely gets rid of all of that. So it's a really powerful feature, and it's a really good new feature. So I strongly recommend using that almost any opportunity you can, because I know I totally do. All right, so the next property, or the next change that I want to show you, isn't necessarily something in ePrime itself. It's actually a change to how we kind of approach teaching ePrime. So I'm going to go ahead and open up just a random window here. We'll go to our product, service, and support site. On our product, service, and support site, one of the things that I want to point out that we've updated in ePrime 3 is this experiment library, this ePrime 3.0 experiment library. This is only available in ePrime 3.0, but what this does is it's a bunch of classic psychological experiments and tasks that have already been made for you, and for the majority of them, for example, if you click on them, for the majority of them, not only do you have a link to the task itself and all of their files associated with it, but they have a video along with them showing you how we made it and what objects can be changed about it. And each one of them comes with a brief little description here as well. So we're actually trying to actively update this. We're going to be updating this with a lot more features and a lot more tasks as we go on. We actually, before we released ePrime 3, we sent a quick survey. You may have actually received one of those, but we sent a quick survey around just saying, what are the top 10 tasks you would like us to make in this experiment library? And we just took the top 10 and we went ahead and made those. And like I said, we'll be updating those as we go on. So if anyone has an idea for the experiment library or a sample that you would like to see, definitely shoot us a message, shoot us, comment on the video, anything like that. We'd be happy to add your task or a task that you'd like to see to this, and then I'll of course turn it into a live stream so I can show you how to make it as well. But that's one of the big things that I did want to talk about with ePrime 3 and some of its new features, is that we do have this large experiment library that is constantly growing. So it'll be a good starting point for your experiment. So say you are doing a lexical decision task, you can actually use the one that we made to start from, and then just change a few of the very simple properties in order to make it exactly what you want. All right, so then the other thing that I want to talk about today, just a little bit here, is we've actually, and this is the last major update that I have here, is we've made a couple of changes to eDataAid. and how it works. Now, I don't necessarily have a data file. Actually, you know what I do? I'll pull up a data file quickly. Open my script task events. Very simple. I don't think I even have real data on here. I have some data. But if you look here, if you're familiar with ePrime2, we actually have a new portion here called load column definition file. Now, what a column definition file is, if you've ever run an ePrime experiment and wanted to look at all of your data, you notice that there's a lot of information on here that you may not immediately need. So, for example, the display's refresh rate. You might not need that the experiment was run in windowed mode. You might not need the experiment version, or the session data, the start time, those types of things. Let's say you're only interested, and I'm only interested in my stimulus RT and my stimulus accuracy, for example. So what I would do is go ahead and remove all of these until I get what I want. So stimulus. There we go. And I'll take the accuracy, and I'll take the RT, and you know what? I'll take the response as well. And I'll go ahead and add those back, and that's all I need. So what I can do then is I can click on this column definition file here in this little drop down, and I can click Save Column Definition. And those are just called .cd3 files. So I'll call this Script Task Events. So then what I can do is I can take that .cd3 file, and if I go ahead and undo all of that, load column definition file, load my script task events column definition file, what it'll do is it'll actually eliminate, and you saw that happen, I'll do it one more time just to show you. You have this data file. If I load a column definition file, it's actually going to not eliminate, but it's going to hide all of the columns that I have, and it'll only show me the ones as defined in this column definition file. So what it's going to do is it's going to take away all of these other columns that I might not need, and it'll only show me my stimulus accuracy, response, and reaction time. This is really a useful feature if you're going to be doing something like testing pilot data, and you have these really nice sets of pilot data and you know exactly what you're looking for. Save that column definition file, or that CD3 file for later, so you only see the columns of your full data file that you need. And if for whatever reason you're like, oh, I want more than just these 3 files, you can always click on this restore spreadsheet. You've seen me do that quite a few times. Click on this restore spreadsheet and you have your full data set there. We never delete data, we only hide it and unhide it basically. And if I look in my my annotations here, you can see that it doesn't show up as me having, you know, eliminated any data or deleted anything, because if you're familiar with how ePrime works with these types of things, if I were to make any of these changes, like, you know, experiment window type false there, first off it's going to show up in red, second off it'll actually show up in my annotations, but loading a column definition file doesn't actually alter the data file enough for it to warrant an actual annotation or something that you might want to see or check out later. So that's one of the really useful features we have for ePrime, is we're trying to actually streamline that data analysis process for everyone, because one of the comments we had gotten about ePrime2 is that, you know, generally speaking, people don't want to be in eData8 for very long. They have their own type of data analysis program. So that, along with that that property that I showed you here, that create tab delimited copy of the data file, those two things really help you to get your data from ePrime into something else a lot faster, so you can do those descriptive and inferential statistics that you want. So that kind of covers all of the other new features of ePrime 3.0. We have a couple of obviously cosmetic changes. So the Experiment Explorer is here. The user script is up at the top here instead of being hidden under the View button, or being under the Windows button or the View button here. So the user script is there. Full script is down here. So they're not, you know, 2 different tabs of the same window. They are in fact their own windows, and they're much easier to access. And the one thing I do like about having the user script up at the top there is I like that it's more accessible, and it's more, it shows you really what context you're loading that user script. So every time we talk about a user script, we talk about defining a global variable, where the user script button, or how to access user script, is literally the first thing in your experiment, because everything in the user script is the first thing in your experiment. And then full script is down here by unreferenced, because generally speaking you can't edit it really, and it's even gray down there, so it helps to really show, you know, hey, this is grayed out. And if you look here, we used to have all of these other windows. If you click on view, you can see all of the windows that we used to be able to add. Now, instead of being separate windows, they're actually down here in the Experiment Explorer, just as separate tabs. So structure actually shows you the structure of the experiment. The browser, this shows you all of the objects that you've used in your experiment, and attributes are all of the attributes that you've used, and then if you hover your mouse over them, they'll show you where they're set. So just a couple of cosmetic changes. The output window is split into two, output and advisor. The debug tab is still in exactly the same place. And we have updated our icons just to give it a more modern type of feel. So yeah, those are all of the changes that I have between ePrime 2 and ePrime 3. If you have any questions about the button device, or especially in these stimulus objects, or sorry, these slide objects, if you have any questions about the button device, the choice, or the slider, definitely check out last week's live stream. We talked a lot about that. I think I spent actually an entire hour talking about all of the properties, so definitely give that a check. Yeah, otherwise, thank you guys very much for watching. Please feel free to like and subscribe on the video. That way we can keep doing what we do here. And otherwise, have a great day, guys.